Welcome to Echoes of Crime. Tonight we are opening up a file that starts as, well, a truly heartbreaking local tragedy in the heart of Oklahoma. But it very quickly unravels into something much more complex, almost Shakespearean, really. A tale of infidelity, deep-seated manipulation, and ultimately deadly betrayal.
That's right. Our source material tonight paints a really vivid picture of a small town, Ada, Oklahoma. And this town was in the early hours of March 22nd, 2021, just irretrievably shocked. We're diving deep into the life and tragic death of Pastor David Evans. He was a man whose public image, as this devoted spiritual leader, just completely contradicted the chaotic, dark secrets hidden behind his own front door.
Yeah, it was just after 1 a.m. that morning. The police received a frantic 911 call. It was from 47-year-old Christy Evans, David's wife. She was claiming that an intruder had broken into their home and, well, shot her husband.
Right. And when officers arrived at the residence, they walked into what can only be described as a scene of absolute domestic horror. They found 50-year-old David Evans, who was the pastor of the Harmony Free Will Baptist Church, deceased, in his own bed.
In his bed.
Yeah. He'd been shot once in the head. And the scene itself, it spoke volumes about the nature of the crime. He was still tucked beneath the covers. It looked like he was asleep when he was shot. The blood was pooling, visibly dripping onto the floor.
Horrific.
It was immediately clear to everyone there this was a premeditated homicide. This wasn't a suicide. It wasn't some random struggle gone wrong.
And the shock factor in Ada, you really can't overstate it. Ada's a small town. This wasn't just any murder. It was the murder of a very prominent, seemingly beloved community figure. We know from reports that several local police officers were actually members of his congregation. They knew David and Christy personally.
Yeah, which just immediately amplified the emotional weight of the investigation right from the start. The whole community was absolutely devastated. I mean, seeing a man of faith killed in what at first looked like a random violent break-in, it's unthinkable.
But the immediate clues, they didn't really support that random narrative, did they?
No, not at all. And that's really the core of our deep dive today. We're trying to untangle that huge contrast. You have the spiritual perfection, the ideal Christian couple image that the Evanses projected to the world. And then you have the terrifying reality of their private life, which very quickly moved the investigation's focus away from some phantom intruder. It shifted towards this tangled web involving really dark family secrets, infidelity, financial motives, and serious allegations of abuse.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking the foundation of this marriage, the Evans family background. Where did David Evans come from?
Well, David Evans was actually born way back east in Camden, New Jersey, October 1970. He was one of 6 kids, and the sources suggest his early life was somewhat complicated. His mother apparently devoted a huge amount of time to caring for his older brother who had cerebral palsy.
Ah, okay. So that might have left David with less direct attention.
Exactly. It seems it led to David having a lot of unstructured time, sort of being left to roam, as one source described it.
Yeah.
Eventually, the family moved quite a distance, relocating to Roland, Oklahoma, and that's where he met Christy Armour.
And Christy, what was her background like?
Christy was younger, nearly 3 years younger than David. She was just a freshman in high school when they met. People who knew her back then described her as, shy, nice, sweet, very caring. She came from a large family, very traditional, very much a church-going family.
So, quite different from David's background, it sounds like. But there was an attraction despite that.
Oh, definitely. According to the reports, Christy was actually going through what sources called a rebellious stage when she met David. And David, well, he kind of embodied that rebellion for her, maybe. He definitely had this bad boy image back then. Long hair, liked to party, a bit of a wild streak.
So the classic opposites attract scenario, perhaps fueled by a bit of teenage rebellion.
It seems that way. And the attraction was immediate and intense. It led them to marry incredibly quickly. In 1991, get this, Christy turned 18 on May 29th. Just 6 days later, on June 4th, they were married.
Wow. That is fast.
Huh.
Barely legal and straight down the aisle. That sounds like a whirlwind.
Absolutely. And that hasty commitment really set the pace for their early family life, too. They started having children almost instantly. Their first daughter was born on Valentine's Day the very next year. Then a son followed just about a year later, March 1st. And their youngest son was born in 1998.
So young marriage, young family. Was it smooth sailing financially?
Not at all, it seems. For years, they really struggled. They lived near Fort Smith, Arkansas, just across the border from Roland. And David, he cycled through different jobs, trying to find some stability. He managed a comic book and game store for a while, Hastings, I think it was called. Then he worked at a small Bible bookstore.
A Bible bookstore. That feels like a significant turn.
It really was. And maybe a bit ironic given what came later, but being in that environment, surrounded by preachers and deacons, apparently inspired him. It sparked something. David decided he wanted to pursue ministry himself. It was a complete shift in focus for him.
And Christy, how did she react to this major life change?
According to all accounts, Christie was incredibly supportive of this new direction, completely behind him. While David started taking night courses in ministry up in Moore, Oklahoma, which is a bit of a drive, Christie was working multiple jobs to keep the family afloat.
Really holding down the fort.
Totally. She worked as a certified nursing assistant, a CNA, then as a dietary aide at Mercy Hospital, and on top of that, she was also cleaning the church they attended and often leading worship services herself. She was deeply involved.
It really sounds like she was the absolute backbone supporting his ambition, his dream.
It does. And eventually, that dream materialized. By 2015, David had worked his way up, and he was named the head pastor at Harmony Free Will Baptist Church right there in Ada, Oklahoma.
So they achieved it. The move to Ada, head pastor position. And publicly, how did they seem?
Publicly, they had successfully crafted this perfect image. They appeared to be the ideal couple, very supportive of each other, often seen teasing each other affectionately. They gave their entire congregation the distinct impression that they were just madly in love.
That public image must have been the first major hurdle for the investigators then when David was murdered.
Absolutely. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the OSBI, took the lead on the case, and they immediately ran into obstacles trying to investigate that initial break-in theory. First off, there were absolutely no signs of forced entry anywhere at the home.
Okay, that's a big red flag for a supposed break-in.
Huge. And second, nothing of value was missing. Nothing at all, which pretty much discounted robbery or a random home invasion right away.
So if it wasn't a break-in gone wrong, the next logical step is enemies, right?
Mhm.
Did they have any... Christy must have been asked that.
She was, and Christie insisted they had none, no enemies. But that wasn't entirely accurate, was it? David's role as pastor, it wasn't universally adored within his own church.
Conflict within the congregation.
Precisely. Remember, this was David's first time leading his own church, and he brought change. Change often creates friction, especially in established traditional congregations. His preaching style was reportedly more moderate than what the very traditional congregation preferred.
How so? What kind of changes?
Well, he wasn't afraid to address difficult, sort of modern topics from the pulpit. Things like abortion, sexuality, even drinking.
Wow, okay, I could definitely see how that would ruffle feathers in a conservative Free Will Baptist setting. That denomination is generally known for a very literal interpretation of Scripture, right? Often emphasizing holiness, separation from worldly influences.
Exactly. So for David to challenge their long-held stances on something like sexuality or drinking, it wouldn't just be seen as difficult. To some older, more traditional members, it could verge on outright heresy.
So there was known conflict. Serious conflict.
Very serious. In fact, according to the investigation files, a family member actually suggested to the OSBI agents early on that David had, quote, probably been murdered by a church member. This person cited known past threats David had received, conflicts over his more modern approach to ministry, an approach he defended, by the way, as simply trying to win people to Jesus.
Okay, so that's a credible lead initially. A disgruntled church member with a history of threats. But you said the evidence pulled the investigation in a different direction.
Radically different, yes. As credible as the church conflict seemed at first, the physical evidence, or lack thereof, at the scene and some routine police work pointed somewhere else entirely.
So the investigation is juggling these possibilities. A church member, maybe some other unknown enemy. But the critical breakthrough, it didn't come from interrogating the congregation.
No, it came from classic, boots-on-the-ground police work, a thorough neighborhood canvass. Agents went door to door talking to neighbors, asking if they'd seen or heard anything unusual in the days or even the week leading up to the murder.
And someone saw something.
Multiple residents did. They mentioned seeing a suspicious vehicle parked near the Evans home, specifically a white Mustang.
A white Mustang, okay.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating here, based on the reports, is the timing of these sightings.
Exactly. This is crucial. Neighbors weren't just seeing it sporadically, like driving by. They reported that this specific white Mustang was parked right outside the Evans residence for the entire week that David was away.
The whole week he was gone. Where was he?
He was on a church mission trip down in Mexico.
Okay, so the pastor leaves town for a week-long mission trip, and this specific car is parked outside his house the entire time he's gone. That just screams something isn't right. It suggests premeditated access, not random chance.
It absolutely does. That timing immediately told police they had to find that car and its owner. This wasn't random, and luckily, technology lent a hand. A neighbor had a video doorbell camera.
The digital witness?
Precisely. It captured footage of the Mustang. And crucially, the car wasn't brand new or generic. It was described as unique, maybe not in the best condition. That made it relatively easier to spot and track in a smaller town like Ida. Police were then able to use surveillance videos from nearby businesses, zoom in, enhance the footage, and capture the license plate number.
That's the classic digital breadcrumb trail leading right to the owner. And where did that license plate lead them?
It led them directly to a 26-year-old man named Khalil Square.
Khalil Square. Did he have any known connection to the Evans family?
Not initially apparent, but when they ran his criminal background check, well, that's when the alarm bells really started going off for the investigators.
What did they find?
Khalil Square had a history of violence, a significant one. He had previously been arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 4 years in prison for assault and battery with a deadly weapon.
Assault and battery with a deadly weapon. What were the specifics?
The records show he stabbed a man during some kind of confrontation. So this wasn't just a minor offense. This was serious, violent behavior in his recent past.
Okay, let's just pause and unpack this for a second. You have a known violent felon, Khalil Square, recently released from prison for stabbing someone. His unique car was repeatedly, deliberately parked outside the pastor's home, specifically during the entire week the pastor was out of the country. This immediately makes Khalil Square the prime suspect, doesn't it?
Without a doubt, he rockets to the top of the list, but the central, burning question remained. What on earth is the connection between Christy Evans, the wife of a devout Baptist minister, and Khalil Square, a man with a violent prison record for assault with a deadly weapon? How did their worlds even intersect?
That question must have forced the investigators to take a much harder look back at Christy's initial 911 call and her statements at the scene.
Exactly, and that's when they started to see the critical inconsistencies, the things that just didn't add up.
Yeah.
The sources detailed 2 major red flags that really stood out to the OSBI agents. First, it was her description of the fatal sound itself.
Right, she claims she heard just a pop sound.
Yeah, a pop. And investigators, based on their experience, immediately found that highly improbable. A 9mm pistol, which was likely the caliber used, fired right next to her, inside a small enclosed space like a bedroom. That would have been deafening.
Not a pop, more like an explosion.
Right. Exactly. A loud bang, an explosion, not a subtle pop. It suggested one of 2 things. Either she wasn't actually in the room when the shot was fired, or she was there and was deliberately downplaying her sensory experience, which implies she might have been expecting it or prepared for it.
Okay, that's one inconsistency.
Right.
What was the second major point?
The second point was her reaction after supposedly discovering her husband had been shot. She claimed that her immediate reaction, instead of freezing in terror or calling 911 right away from the bedroom or even checking on David, was to stand up, leave the bedroom, and go check the back door.
She went to check the back door. Why?
Well, she noted to the officers that the back door was unlocked. Her stated reason, presumably, was to see if the intruder had entered or exited that way. But investigators found this highly illogical, even suspicious. Think about it. A woman who just found her husband brutally murdered in their bed? Her instinct typically wouldn't be to go investigate the potential escape route of a potentially still present armed intruder.
No, you'd think self-preservation would kick in. Seek safety, call for help, maybe hide, not actively go looking for where the killer might have gone.
Precisely. It sounded less like a terrified victim's reaction and more like someone trying to preemptively establish a narrative that conveniently explained the unlocked back door and maybe accounted for the noise she claimed wasn't that loud. As the investigators themselves put it, based on these points, something felt fundamentally off about her entire story. Her demeanor, her descriptions, it just didn't ring true.
Which made the need to confront her directly about Khalil Square, the owner of that Mustang, absolutely unavoidable.
Exactly. They had the car, they had the owner's violent history, and they had major holes in Christie's initial account. So, based on those inconsistencies and the hard evidence linking Khalil's car to the house while David was away, police brought Christy Evans back in for much more intensive questioning. This was less than 48 hours after David's murder. They were ready. They were going to present her with the details about Khalil Square.
And when they confronted her with Khalil's name, with the evidence of his car being there, what happened?
The facade just crumbled. Instantly, the image of the devout, grieving Christian wife evaporated. She confessed. but not to the murder, not yet. She confessed to the connection, using this chillingly understated phrase that just rocked the entire investigation. She said, "That was my boyfriend."
That was my boyfriend. Wow. So, an affair. But you said earlier it went deeper than that.
Oh, much deeper. She didn't stop there. Christie immediately escalated the situation by revealing the truly shocking truth about her marriage to David. She admitted that she and David, the pastor, were actively engaged in the swinger lifestyle.
Wait, swingers. The pastor and his wife.
Yes, she admitted they regularly traveled together, usually up to Oklahoma City, to meet up with other partners, other couples, other single men, usually at hotels.
This is the absolute crux of the hypocrisy, isn't it? David, the pastor, publicly preaching about morality, challenging his congregation on difficult topics like sexuality.
While privately engaging in, and according to Christie, actually initiating this sexually permissive lifestyle, she was clear. It began with David wanting a threesome. The entire structure, the drive behind it, came from his desires, his needs.
He initiated it. And how did Khalil Square fit into this? Was he one of these partners they met?
Yes, and the way they found him is also revealing. The sources are explicit. David Evans found 26-year-old Khalil Square through Craigslist.
Craigslist. He was searching for sexual partners for them on Craigslist.
Apparently so. David arranged the very first sexual encounter, which took place in Moore, Oklahoma. Then they met up again just a week later. This confirms David wasn't just passively consenting, he was actively managing the external elements of their secret sexual life.
It sounds less like a mutually agreed lifestyle choice and more like David was curating experiences, possibly fueling, as you suggested, some kind of severe sexual addiction that he absolutely had to keep secret from his church and community.
That's certainly the picture Christie painted. But even within this secret life, the Evanses had established specific, very strict guidelines, sort of rules of engagement for these encounters.
Rules? What kind of rules?
They were primarily designed to maintain control and, crucially, anonymity, presumably to protect their public reputation at all costs. The main rules were absolutely no ongoing, sustained contact with any participants outside of the scheduled encounters. They were transactional, and they weren't even supposed to use their real names. The whole point was discretion, detachment.
Keep it purely physical, anonymous, and controlled by David. But those rules were completely broken, weren't they, by Christie?
Completely and disastrously broken by Christie. According to her statement, after that second threesome involving Khalil, Christie made a very deliberate, calculated move. She secretly wrote down her real phone number on a small piece of paper and left it on the floor where she knew Khalil would find it after she and David had left.
Wow. That's not an accident. That's a conscious decision to establish a private connection, directly violating David's control structure and their agreement.
Absolutely. It was a deliberate act of defiance against David's rules, and it marked the beginning of her secret communication, leading to an emotional and physical affair with Khalil, completely separate from David's involvement.
And that hidden note, that secret communication, it must have escalated significantly when David left town for that mission trip.
Exactly. David, leaving for Mexico, provided the perfect opportunity. With him gone, Christie invited Khalil Square to come down to Ada and stay at the marital residence.
He stayed at their house while David was away.
For several nights, yes, engaging in sexual encounters right there in the pastor's home. When police initially questioned her right after the murder, she withheld all of this information. She admitted later she deliberately kept it secret because she feared, quote, it would make it look bad that she had her lover staying in the house while her pastor husband was away doing mission work.
Understatement of the year.
Right. She also claimed at that point that while she knew about Khalil's violent past, the stabbing conviction, she just didn't think he was capable of actually killing David. The police let her leave after that initial confession of the affair and the swinging lifestyle, but they absolutely knew they were only scratching the surface. There was much more to this story.
And the case took its most dramatic, most definitive turn just a few days later, didn't it? But the truth wasn't forced out by police this time.
No, it came from within the family itself, a desperate family member reaching out. Just 3 days after David's death, on March 25th, Christie's own daughter contacted the OSBI agents directly. She essentially overrode her mother's previous statements.
What did the daughter say?
She told the lead agents, quote, my mother needs to come back in. There's something that she needs to tell you about this case.
That's a profound moment. The daughter realizing her mother hadn't told the whole truth, feeling compelled to intervene. That must have taken incredible courage.
It must have. And it led directly to the full, devastating confession. When Christie was brought back in, prompted by her daughter's intervention, she finally admitted the whole truth. Khalil Square did not act alone. He didn't act randomly. He killed David Evans at her explicit
In
request.
her request. So murder for hire, essentially, orchestrated by the wife.
That's what she admitted. She was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
But the narrative she presented immediately branched out, didn't it? She wasn't just confessing to plotting the murder, she was providing this elaborate backstory, attempting to mitigate her actions. She started framing herself as a long-suffering victim.
Exactly. Her confession immediately came packaged with claims of years, even decades, of abuse. She claimed David was intensely verbally abusive, extremely controlling, and that he had forced her into the swinger lifestyle against her will due to his own sexual perversion.
What specific claims of coercion and abuse did she make?
They were extensive and painted a picture of relentless psychological pressure. She alleged David constantly wore down her boundaries regarding the sexual acts, using lines like, "If you love me, you'll do this for me." And if she resisted or hesitated, that's when the verbal abuse would allegedly begin.
What kind of verbal abuse?
She stated he'd start by calling her names like stupid idiot, but it would quickly escalate to much harsher, degrading slurs like bitch, slut, and whore. She also claimed he attacked her physical appearance constantly, telling her she was so fat, you're ugly. Just constant degradation aimed at her self-worth.
That kind of sustained verbal and emotional abuse is a key component of coercive control. Did she mention other forms of control?
Oh, yes. This control allegedly extended far beyond the sexual and verbal abuse, permeating almost every aspect of her daily life, especially after they moved to Ada, where she felt more isolated. She specifically highlighted David's use of technology to enforce this control. She told investigators he used the Life 360 app on their phones.
Life 360, that's a family location sharing app, right?
Yes, commonly used by parents to track their kids. But according to Christie, in David's hands, it became a tool of perpetual surveillance. He used it to track her location every single minute of the day. This meant she had zero privacy, couldn't make any secret excursions or meet anyone without him potentially knowing. It massively increased her feeling of being watched, controlled, and trapped, especially being in Ada, away from her original family and support network in the Fort Smith area.
So, constant surveillance on top of the alleged verbal and sexual coercion. You mentioned she claimed David drove the swinger lifestyle. Did she elaborate on his motivations?
She did. Christie described David as suffering from what she called a severe sexual addiction. He was the one who established all the connections with other partners, often online. He insisted on watching her with other men. For him, she claimed, sex became his primary escape and his main source of entertainment, maybe from the pressures and secrets of his ministry life.
And under this alleged coercion, she participated. How often?
The numbers she claimed were staggering. Christie told investigators that under this constant pressure and coercion from David, she was forced to sleep with anywhere from 50 to 100 different men over the years.
50 to 100 men. That's an incredible number, if true, painting a picture of extreme sexual exploitation within the marriage, if her account is accurate.
It's a shocking claim. And importantly, the abuse wasn't apparently restricted just to Christie. Other sources, including statements from their children, indicated David was allegedly very abusive, sometimes physically and violently abusive to his children as well.
Physically abusive to the children.
Yes. Their son later claimed that he sometimes went to school with visible injuries, including concussions he attributed to his father. He described living in perpetual fear of David's temper.
Okay, so Christie's narrative is years of escalating verbal abuse, extreme control including digital surveillance, forced participation in a swinger lifestyle involving dozens of men, and knowledge or witnessing of physical abuse towards the children.
Correct. And in Christie's mind, as she explained it to investigators, all these factors combined created a situation of utter desperation. She felt completely isolated in Ada. She believed she couldn't simply file for divorce. She claimed she feared David would kill himself if she left or potentially turn his violence on her or the children. She concluded, quite chillingly, that murder was her only way out.
With that rationale set in her mind, she then detailed the specific plot she finalized with Khalil Square. During that week, David was away in Mexico.
Yes. The plan itself was disturbingly clinical in its simplicity. Step 1. Christie would administer a sleeping pill to David to ensure he was deeply unconscious. Step 2. She would leave the back door unlocked. Step 3. Khalil was to enter the house, go to the bedroom, execute David with the gun while he slept, and then leave, making it look like a botched home invasion or burglary.
And they carried out this plan.
They did. Just 2 days after David returned home from his mission trip, they put the plan into action. Khalil entered the house, went to the bedroom, and, as the prosecution later stated, executed Mr. Evans while he was asleep.
The revelation of all these secrets, the swinging, the Craigslist encounters, the decades of alleged abuse, and then this cold-blooded murder plot, it must have completely shattered the community's perception of the Evans family.
Absolutely shattered it, turned that perfect public image completely inside out. The community was shocked, horrified, and the family, the children especially, were devastated. They essentially lost both parents in an instant. One deceased by violence, the other arrested for orchestrating it. Reports describe family members just numb, stuck on a curb, just bawling after learning the truth.
So Christie confessed to orchestrating the murder, framing it as an escape from abuse. What happened with Khalil Square?
Well, following Christie's full confession, the OSBI obviously needed to bring Khalil in. They used cell phone pings to locate him relatively quickly, finding him in the Norman, Oklahoma area. He was taken into custody, and when investigators confronted him with Christie's detailed statement that she had asked him to kill David, he also confessed. He admitted to being the shooter.
Okay, so both confessed to their roles. Case closed.
Not quite, because Khalil's confession immediately introduced a competing narrative, a counter-story. While he admitted pulling the trigger, he claimed that Christie Evans had systematically manipulated him into committing the murder. He positioned himself not as a willing co-conspirator, but as her pawn.
The blame game begins. It's not if it happened, but who was really pulling the strings.
Precisely. It became a high-stakes question of who was the true mastermind. Khalil claimed that after their secret communication began, and especially after he stayed with her while David was away, he developed profound, intense feelings for Christie. He told investigators he loved Christie. He genuinely believed the stories she was telling him about the abuse, and he believed her promises that they would have a wonderful life together once David was gone.
And Christie played on these feelings.
According to Khalil and the evidence gathered, absolutely. She played this dynamic perfectly. The sources note she was constantly showering him with attention, calling him, texting him, FaceTiming him multiple times every single day. She allegedly made him feel uniquely special, needed, like he was her savior.
That sounds like a classic honeypot situation, using intimacy and emotional validation to manipulate someone. She leveraged his desire for her, but also her story of victimhood.
She leveraged both powerfully. According to Khalil's account, Christie systematically began feeding him increasingly intense and graphic stories about how abusive David was, how horrible her marriage was, how trapped she felt. She combined this narrative of desperation with a subtle threat, suggesting that if David ever found out about their affair, there would be severe consequences, implying danger not just for her, but for Khalil too. The underlying message was, David finding out meant they could never see each other again, destroying the future she was dangling in front of him. She used his fear and his feelings for her like a weapon.
So emotional manipulation, leveraging the affair, leveraging the abuse stories. Was there anything else involved?
Oh, yes. There was a massive financial incentive layered right into the plot. This wasn't just about escape or love. It was also about money.
Money? How so?
David Evans, the pastor, had a significant life insurance policy. It was valued at $250,000.
$250,000. And Christie stood to inherit that.
As his wife, yes. And according to Khalil, Christie made him a very specific promise regarding that money. She promised him a huge chunk of it, $160,000, plus a brand new truck. The money and the truck were framed as the means for them to start their new life together, to live, in her words, happily ever after.
Wow. $160,000 and a new truck. That's a powerful motivator on top of the emotional manipulation, especially for someone perhaps recently out of prison and looking for a fresh start.
Undeniably. Khalil, apparently blinded by his feelings for Christie, swayed by the constant stream of abuse stories, and tempted by the promise of significant wealth, became entirely consumed by her plan.
It's really stark how some of the sources describe this dynamic. The language used isn't just persuasion. It's much more aggressive, suggesting intense manipulation.
It is. Some accounts claim Christie, quote, screwed him stupid and played him like a fiddle. They suggest she used her sexual prowess to get him to do whatever she wanted, up to and including carrying out the actual execution.
The manipulation seems even more complex when you remember Khalil's own history.
Yeah.
He wasn't naive about violence. He'd already served prison time for it.
That's a crucial point. He claimed he was internally wrestling with the morality of committing murder, knowing full well the potential consequences, having already been incarcerated for violence. And adding another layer of control, Khalil apparently didn't even own a firearm himself.
He didn't have a gun, so Christie provided the weapon.
According to Khalil's confession, yes. Christie demonstrated further control and premeditation by providing the murder weapon. It was reportedly a gun that had been given to David, her husband, possibly for protection. She made sure Khalil had access to it, leaving it out for him to use on the night of the murder.
She provided the means, the motive, love, escape, money, and the opportunity. But the ultimate test of this psychological pressure cooker came on the actual night of the murder, didn't it? Khalil claimed he hesitated.
He did. According to his statement, once he was actually inside the house, had crept into the bedroom and was standing there over the sleeping David Evans with the gun. He froze. He admitted he got cold feet. He just could not do it. He had crossed the physical threshold into the house, but that final psychological barrier of taking a life seemed, at that moment, insurmountable for him.
He faltered, but the murders still happened. So what changed?
This is perhaps the most chilling part of the entire narrative, according to Khalil's account. Christie didn't just wait passively, she intervened, physically and decisively. She demonstrated absolute control in that critical final moment.
She didn't let him back out.
No. According to Khalil, Christie told him she couldn't pull the trigger herself. Her alleged reasoning was that she didn't know how to properly use the gun and she didn't want to mess it up by shooting David multiple times, which might look less like a clean execution. Then, she physically pulled Khalil up, urged him forward, and issued the final, terrifying command, repeating it, "Go do it now. Go do it now."
Go do it now. She literally pushed him into it at the last second.
That's his claim. Under that intense, immediate pressure from Christie, coupled with the fear that David might wake up at any second, Khalil Square carried out the act. He shot David Evans once in the head as he slept.
So, with both Christie and Khalil confessing to their parts, she the mastermind, he the trigger man, albeit allegedly under duress, the legal battle then shifted entirely away from guilt or innocence, right? It became about motive, mitigation, and ultimately sentencing.
Exactly. The trials, or rather the sentencing phases, became the focus. Christie's defense team centered their entire strategy on arguing that she was a victim of long-term coercive control.
Coercive control. Could you explain that concept a bit more in this context?
Certainly. Coercive control is a pattern of behavior. It's not just isolated incidents. It involves tactics like intimidation, degradation, isolation, and control, often psychological, emotional, and financial, rather than purely physical violence, although physical violence can be part of it. Christie's defense argued that the decades of alleged verbal abuse, the extreme control David exerted over her finances and movements using that Life 360 app, and forcing her into the swinger lifestyle against her will, had completely stripped her of her autonomy and agency.
So the argument was that she felt she had no other choice.
Essentially, yes. They argued she felt so profoundly isolated, particularly after moving to Ada, and so trapped by David's control and her fear of him, that she genuinely, albeit wrongly, saw murdering him as the only possible way to escape the situation. They detailed how he allegedly controlled everything what she wore, who she could talk to, constantly undermining her self-worth to maintain dominance.
That sounds like a compelling narrative of victimization. But you mentioned earlier this defense strategy ran into a major legal roadblock in Oklahoma.
It did, a critical one. While Oklahoma law does recognize battered woman syndrome, BWS, as a potential factor in self-defense or mitigation cases, BWS typically requires evidence of significant physical abuse. Coercive control, which often manifests primarily as psychological, emotional, verbal, and financial abuse without necessarily constant physical battery, was not, at that time, explicitly admissible as evidence for mitigation purposes in a jury trial in Oklahoma.
So if her case went to a jury, they might not even get to hear about the tracking app, the verbal abuse, the force swinging all the core elements of her defense.
That was the risk, yes. The judge could potentially exclude all that evidence as irrelevant under the existing BWS framework, leaving the jury to see only the affair, the financial motive from the insurance policy, and the cold, premeditated nature of the murder plot she confessed to orchestrating.
That's a huge gamble for the defense, so what did they do?
They made a highly strategic, though certainly risky, legal maneuver. In April 2022, Christie Evans entered what's known as a blind plea.
A blind plea. What exactly does that mean, and why was it strategic here?
Okay, so a blind plea is when a defendant pleads guilty to the charges against them without having a pre-negotiated agreement with the prosecution about what the sentence will be. Instead of a plea bargain guaranteeing a specific sentence, the defendant essentially throws themselves on the mercy of the court, asking the judge, not a jury, to listen to all the facts and then decide the appropriate sentence.
Ah, I see the strategy now. By pleading guilty, she avoided the jury trial where the coercive control evidence might have been excluded.
Exactly. But the sentencing hearing after the guilty plea, which would be conducted solely before the judge, provided the perfect venue for her defense team to present all the evidence. They could lay out the entire history of the alleged toxic marriage, the abuse claims, the isolation, the coercion, directly to the judge, hoping it would sway the judge toward a more lenient sentence, perhaps something closer to manslaughter due to duress, rather than the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder. It was a calculated risk to ensure her full story was heard by the decision-maker.
So, the sentencing hearing happened in August 2022. The judge heard everything, Christie's detailed claims of abuse and control. How did the prosecution counter this narrative of her being a trapped victim?
The prosecution argued forcefully against the victim narrative. They contended that Christie was fundamentally motivated by two very clear, self-serving factors. First, financial gain from that $250,000 life insurance policy, and second, the simple desire for a new, unfettered relationship and life with Khalil Square, free from her husband.
Did they address her claims of isolation and having no options?
They did. They countered the isolation claims by pointing out objective facts. Christie held a job outside the home, she had her own debit card giving her some financial access, and she had coworkers and potentially friends she could have reached out to for help or support if she had chosen to. They emphasized that while David may well have been cruel, controlling, and abusive, and they didn't necessarily dispute all aspects of that, he didn't deserve to be murdered, there were other options besides orchestrating his execution.
So the defense built a case for sympathy based on years of alleged abuse. The prosecution countered with financial motives and available alternatives. But the prosecution had one more card to play, didn't they? Something that completely undermined Christie's portrayal of herself as a remorseful victim.
They did, and it was absolutely devastating to her mitigation case. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecution introduced explicit jailhouse letters that Christie had written while she was incarcerated awaiting trial. Letters she wrote not just to Khalil, but apparently to other men as well.
Jailhouse letters, what do they say?
They painted a picture of Christie that starkly contrasted with the downtrodden victim narrative. Instead, they revealed a woman who was incredibly boasting about her sexual appeal and seemingly showing little remorse, even making light of the situation. In one absolutely stunning letter, she wrote explicitly, quote, "I'm so good in bed that any man would have killed my husband."
Wow. Any man would have killed my husband because she's so good in bed. That completely reframes everything. It shifts the narrative from a desperate victim to a calculating manipulator consciously using sex as leverage for murder.
It was incredibly damaging. And there was another line, equally damning, where she seemed to reflect on her predicament with a chilling detachment. She wrote something like, "I guess I should have paid more attention to Dateline episodes."
Like her main regret was getting caught, not the act itself. Learning how not to leave evidence, perhaps.
That's certainly how the prosecution presented it, and likely how the judge interpreted it. It suggested a lack of genuine remorse and a focus on the tactical failure of the plan, rather than the moral horror of the murder.
So with all this evidence presented, the abuse claims, the counter-arguments, and these incredibly damaging letters,
Yeah.
how did the judge rule?
On August 10th, 2022, the judge delivered the verdict and the sentence. The judge formally ruled against accepting the coercive control argument at a legal justification or sufficient mitigation for murder in this case. The judge stated clearly that Christie Evans did not meet the criteria required for a battered woman syndrome defense under Oklahoma law. And then, looking directly at Christie, the judge delivered a powerful condemnation, explicitly using Christie's own words from those letters against her. The judge said something to the effect of, "Your own words tell me who you really are."
Your own words tell me who you really are. A direct rebuke based on those jailhouse letters and the sentence.
Christie Evans was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
Life with parole and Khalil Square.
Khalil Square also pleaded guilty, likely as part of an agreement, and was sentenced separately for his role as the shooter. He also received a significant prison sentence. But the consensus among investigators and the prosecution regarding the ultimate responsibility for David's death remained absolute. As one official put it, "But for Christie Evans, Khalil Square never in a million years would have committed this crime."
And the family, the children.
They were left to grapple with an incredibly complex and painful truth. They acknowledged, according to reports, that their father, David, had indeed been cruel and abusive towards them and their mother, but they were also clear he didn't deserve to be murdered. They lost both parents that day, one to violence, the other to incarceration for orchestrating it.
This deep dive really forces us to confront that profound, jarring disconnect between the public image the Evans family projected, loving, spiritual, devoted, and the absolute chaos and darkness of their private reality. A reality fueled, it seems, by David's alleged sexual demands and controlling behavior, but culminating tragically in Christie's calculated manipulation and a cold-blooded murder plot. It's the ultimate terrifying lesson in the danger of hidden dysfunction behind closed doors.
It really is. And it's a case that exposes the immense complexity surrounding abuse, victimhood, and agency. While Christie's legal defense of coercive control ultimately failed in court, the sources we've examined clearly outline credible claims of a life lived under significant duress, isolation, and psychological control. That seems hard to dispute. Yet her own actions, particularly the introduction of a clear financial incentive, the methodical manipulation of a vulnerable third party, Khalil, and then those subsequent boastful jailhouse letters, made it impossible for the court, and perhaps for many observers, to view her solely as a passive victim just seeking escape. The evidence strongly suggested she seized an opportunity not just to escape her situation, but to completely replace her life with a new one, funded by her husband's death.
It's interesting, despite the life sentence, Christie herself offered a final, somewhat self-aware perspective from jail, didn't she? Acknowledging her fate.
She did. In statements made after her sentencing, she reportedly said, "I really do think my sentence is fair." And she added, "God's the only one who can give you mercy." Perhaps most tellingly, her final piece of advice, which she seemingly intended for others who might find themselves in abusive or controlling situations, speaks volumes about her own experience, particularly the isolation component. She warned, "Don't isolate yourself. Find somebody that you can talk to."
She continued, because when you're in the middle of the situation, you are not going to be thinking straight.
You are not going to be thinking straight. That really rings true, doesn't it? Especially when you consider her move to Ada, away from her family support system, combined with David's alleged use of technology to monitor and control her. This case stands as such a tragic reminder that victims of abuse often don't fit a neat, predictable pattern. Christie had some external markers of independence. She had a job, her own debit card, yet she described feeling perpetually trapped by the psychological, emotional, and sexual demands of a man whose public persona completely masked, it seems, a very deep corruption. And that profound sense of isolation she described, when combined with her apparent capacity for manipulation and the opportunity presented by Khalil, ultimately led to the catastrophic decision to orchestrate her husband's murder.
It leaves us with such difficult questions. This tragic deep dive into the Evans marriage forces us, really, to confront this idea that in complex cases involving claims of abuse, the question of who started it or how bad was the abuse can sometimes overshadow the central legal and ethical principles. Does any level of sustained abuse, however horrific, justify premeditated murder orchestrated through the manipulation of a third party? Or, conversely, does the act of calculatingly manipulating someone else, especially with a financial motive, completely negate any claims of victimhood, regardless of the prior circumstances?
It's that painful complexity, isn't it? What does this case teach us about how we judge the choices people make when they genuinely believe, rightly or wrongly, that they have absolutely no other way out?
A chilling ethical dilemma indeed. We leave that thought with you.